Hello, hello. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Washington Leadership Program session tonight. I'm Colby Kyo. I'm one of the co-chairs for CAPAL, the Conference in Asian Pacific American Leadership. We're so excited and thrilled for you to be here for our finale today. Thank you to our panelists for being with us tonight, for volunteering and taking your time to be here. For those who are unfamiliar with CAPAL, we are a nonprofit aged 30 plus years that is working to develop future leaders, future public service officials of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander descent. We're working on creating those career pathways. We provide opportunities for mentorship, professional development, but one of our signature programs is this Washington Leadership Program, which brings experts at different parts in their career from different sectors at a different thematic sector week to week. This summer, we've heard from folks from advocacy backgrounds, from climate advocacy, from media representation. And tonight's session, we thought it would be appropriate to focus on what's next for AANHPIs in the public service sector, and thinking about the future. So today, I'm really thrilled to be tonight with this panel. But before we head on today, just a few reminders. I want to thank our sponsors, the DC Mayor's Office in Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, APIA, which has been a really awesome supporter for our group, Comcast, Bonafide Masks, and of course, Verizon, our host here today as well. Before we proceed tonight, I want to invite Ajay Kunapli from Verizon to open today's session.
Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome to the Verizon Technology and Policy Center. So my name is Ajay Kunapli and I help manage the center here in DC. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you need to use the bathroom at any point, it's right down that door across the hallway on the right side. You're welcome to get water at the bevy station in the back by the food. And after the program, if you have some time, we have a neat little exhibit showcase all around the space here. Please feel free to take some time, wander around, and if you see anything that you're interested in, come find me. I'm happy to answer any questions, walk you through it. I think it's all really interesting stuff. So since you're here in the Verizon office today, I want to give you a little bit of background on the company. For the last 2 decades, Verizon has been a world leader in wireless technology, fiber optics, cybersecurity, and much more. Verizon serves roughly 130 million customers per month and maintains one of the most robust internet networks on the globe, touching 140 different countries. So in accordance with this scale and influence, Verizon has felt a responsibility to be a social advocate. As a major producer of goods, we aim to be conscious of diversity across our supply chain, spending $5 billion a year in procurement from women and diversity and minority-owned businesses. Verizon was one of the first companies to publicly call for comprehensive immigration reform and was a staunch supporter of DACA. In 2020, Verizon denounced the rise in anti-Asian hate, committing $15 million to accelerate social justice across the Asian community. This included providing funding to leading organizations on the front lines of advancing AAPI racial equity, media inventory, advocating for Asian rights and mental health, and promotion of small businesses across the AAPI community. Verizon has enjoyed expansive relationships with many leading AAPI advocacy groups, including Asian Americans Advancing Justice, APIA Vote, OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates, and of course, CAPAL. So we at Verizon are delighted that you're here today and hope you find the discussion to be both educational and inspiring. Working in DC for the summer is a really exciting opportunity, and we hope experiences like this one will make your summer as meaningful as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. CAPAL, we're very proud to be a small, scrappy nonprofit, and so things would not be possible without generous sponsors. So thank you to Verizon and our partners for making nights like tonight possible. It also wouldn't be possible without the DC Mayor's Office. We're really proud to have this community connection, particularly this year. And so it's very appropriate that we open this final session and to bring us to a close for our summer series, I want to introduce Ben de Guzman, who's going to give closing remarks. Ben serves as director at the Mayor's Office in Asian Pacific Islander Affairs. He's been the leading voice at the local and national level on issues of racial equity, immigrants' rights, Veterans Affairs, and LGBTQ justice for 20 years. He comes from APIA, where he served as community outreach specialist, and he is the co-founder and longtime co-director of the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. He worked for over 10 years on behalf of over 20 locally based Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and Pacific Islander LGBTQ organizations, serving all genders on a range of issues, including domestic violence and gender justice. So Ben, with that, closing remarks, bring us home.
Thank you, Colby. Wow, good evening, everyone. As Colby said, I'm Ben de Guzman. I'm the director for the Mayor's Office on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs here in DC. And I'm honored to be invited to provide a closing keynote to CAPAL's Washington Leadership Program. Professionally, and in the interest of full disclosure, as Colby mentioned, as the director of the office, my team and I oversee a community grants program that among its grantees includes CAPAL. And so we're proud of the relationship we've been able to develop with CAPAL. Personally, I've been a speaker at a lot of WLP sessions over the years, so much that at one point someone had mistaken me for a CAPAL board member. And it was a long, long time ago. I feel like I was probably low-key annoyed at the time, but given the who's who list of people who have served CAPAL as board members, I probably should have taken it as an honor, and I do so now. But as I look back on those days, and as I look back at my career in nonprofit and now in local government, I can see the common threads of public service that we're talking about tonight and that have really been interwoven throughout my career. I guess it's in my blood. My grandmother actually was a teacher in the Philippines. My uncle, who was my namesake, Uncle Ben, represented the Philippines as an attorney for the UN in the 60s. And my twin brother just recently wrapped up a 25-year career in the Navy as an officer and sometimes a gentleman. But as I was thinking about what I wanted to say tonight, two things came to my mind. The first is that in some ways, public service is in many of our DNAs, or at least in the ways in which we were raised, right? Like as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child, and many of us were raised in communities and cultures that valued the collective as opposed to the individual, right? Like we recognize the interconnectedness between ourselves and our families, our ancestors, and our communities. We respect our elders, even as we bless those among our youth and those who follow in our footsteps. This sense of obligation and collective responsibility is found throughout so many of the different cultures that many of us are coming from, right? So in Tagalog, we talk about utang na loob, but also kapwa as a sense of the individual defined by their role in the community. Native Hawaiian culture has the concept of kuleana, as I'm sitting there looking over at our friend in the East-West Center, but responsibility to a collective larger than yourself. But you know, all of these kind of esoteric ideas aside, as you go forward from this summer and your experiences here, the role that your village has played in making you the person you are, the giants whose shoulders we're all standing on, they're proud of you, I'm proud of you, we're proud of you, and we hope that you can pay that forward as well. So the second thing is, one lesson that I've learned is that it's important to find the right mix of blazing your own trail, but also letting the journey take you where it will, right? So knowing who you are, but also being open to new ideas is really important, especially at this stage in your life. I continue to kind of giggle at a lot of the ironies in the path I've taken. When I was applying to college, I chose not to identify my race. And as we think about affirmative action now, it's a lot of the questions I wrestled with when I was in high school. What is this Asian American thing? What is this affirmative action thing? What does it mean to apply to the University of California, where they have Filipino/Filipino as categories that you can identify as? So I did not choose my ethnicity, when I applied to UC Berkeley. And so therefore I was not reached out to by the Filipino recruitment and retention program on campus. I felt like, I didn't need to prove who I was in terms of my identity. But when Grace Asuncion, who was a Filipina on our campus, was murdered in our student activities building, it was a gut check. As I sat in the memorial service for her and I saw the community wrap its arms around themselves and around her family, it made me think what I was doing in my life, right? So sometimes when I tell this story, I romanticize it as like my origin story. That was like the critical moment that set me on the path. The reality is that fall I took Tagalog and like half the class were board members of the Filipino American Alliance. And I kind of got just recruited into the movement. But those folks, that class, that home was really my political and cultural home for the next 3 years after that. But I say two things, right? But actually, I always like to speak in threes. So let me leave you with one final observation. A lot of the speakers you've probably heard from over the summer have probably talked about networking, right? Like how important the important role that it plays in helping advance your career. But I also know that I myself thought about networking as kind of cheesy, or it made me feel awkward. I think the kids say it makes you feel cringe, right? But that it's self-serving, or it's just for slick people who are trying to build their address books. We used to call them Rolodexes, right? But when it's done appropriately, it's not about advancing your own career, right? Like it's about building connections and finding a common cause with people who share your interests, and hopefully finding those common interests in a way that advances the common good. I always think of Norm Mineta, right? Essentially the godfather of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander politics here in DC. He was really successful because of three things. He was hella smart and he worked really hard. He was great at making connections and remembering those connections, from the President of the United States to that lowly staffer at a partner organization that he happened to remember lived in the same dorm that he did when he was at school. But three, he leveraged those connections and brought so many people with him on his journey to public service and to serving the common good. So as I close, I think about one of the things that Norm used to say. He always used to say, thanks a million. So I wanted to close in that spirit. I wanted to thank you for letting me share my thoughts with you. I hope that you're able to go forward and give thanks to those people in your lives who are helping you along your way. So thanks a million and best of luck on your journey.
Thanks a million, Ben. Let's give it up for Ben de Guzman. And we're so lucky, we're so grateful to have you at the helm at all things AA and NHNPI here in DC. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your support of Kapal. Even if you're mistakenly identified for a board member, we're thankful for that. And board applications are open, so hit us up. All right, everybody, a few last notes before we get rolling. Tonight's session is recorded. It is live streamed. If you missed any of our past sessions, you can check them out. If you are not eating or drinking tonight, throw on that mask. I'm going to do so right after I finish speaking here. There will be a survey that's very important for you to fill out because it helps identify that you were here. And with that, I'm so pleased to have Nöel here, who's going to be moderating our panel. Nöel is CEO of APIA Scholars, and she's going to be taking us through the session today. So everyone, welcome our panel, and thank you, Nöel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. How are you all enjoying this lovely, cool, wonderful weather? Have any of you experienced blow drying your hair in the restroom before you go to a meeting? I bet Ben knows what that's like, and Sarah knows what that's like in DC in the summers. Really? You guys were all nice and cool walking the streets of DC in the summer? I was gonna say, right? No, oh my goodness. Okay, hold on. Everybody stand up. Everybody, you guys are just like staring at me. I think it's a food coma. I think we need some stretching. Somebody, one of you, does somebody do yoga? Can we need some like, up to the left and up to the right. And maybe we need, no, don't bend over because you just ate. But like, we need to move a little bit. You guys are, I'm getting no energy from you. Okay. I'm going to need some sort of energy back. Smiles? Or like smile with your eyes because you have masks on? Okay. All right. You guys are a tough crowd, but we're going to make it work. Okay. All right. So didn't it feel better to just stand up and move your body just a little bit? Well, I want to thank Kapal so much for inviting APIA scholars, myself, and this amazing panel. We have a great group of folks here. Our conversation tonight is going to be about public service and how the choices that you're making now can potentially impact many years in the future. I love what Ben said about well, I'm paraphrasing, but being planful about your life, but also being flexible. And I bet all of us have interesting stories that led us to where we're at today because we were willing to take paths that we had no idea were open to us. I had no idea about this job when I was a kindergartner and I wanted to be a flight attendant very badly. So that's not what I'm doing now, but we have to be open to new paths. So I'd like to introduce the panel and I'm going to actually, well, I'm going to actually start with Ben because you just met him. Does anybody just want to give him another shout out? Amazing. I hope you took notes. That's another secret to success is to have a little journal with you, pull out that pen and take notes of amazing things people like Ben say. So did you want to introduce any other interesting things about yourself? Yes, do it.
I mean, we're going to talk about identity later, but I feel like growing up as a person of color, growing up as a son of immigrants, growing up as someone who wasn't quite sure why he was different when he was a kid, and it was because, duh, you're gay. Growing up as a twin who had to fight for half of everything.
Yes. Oh,
Any twins in the audience? Anyway.
These guys are tough. We're going to make this entire group.
Well, that's an accident of birth.
Oh, yeah.
So that's fine. No, but all of those things really conspired to develop in me a sharpened sense of equity and fair play. So I always feel like that has always informed the path that I take. So, I mean, I shared my own kind of creation myth, but, I really think it was growing up in the way that I did that really made me want to fight for the people who couldn't fight for themselves.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I would also like to introduce Mary Perez Hattori, who is joining us from Hawaii, which I believe it is about lunchtime there. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Aloha, hafere.
Oh, we're so excited. Aloha. We're excited to see you. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hafere, Mary Therese Perez Hattori, originally from the island of Guahan or Guam in the North Pacific, and happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Mary. Raise your hand if you've been to Guam. Oh, it's a place. It's such a beautiful, beautiful place. Highly recommend.
It's where America's Day begins.
It is. You guys get that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sarah, I am so excited to introduce, talk about circuitous paths. Sarah and I met probably over 10 years ago, way before we were both moms, before all of life has taken over. Just an amazing path, an amazing person. And I'm just really honored to be on a panel with Sarah Ha.
Thanks, Noel. Super excited to be reunited. Funny story is that as I was taking in the train from New York City, a Facebook memory came up that listed that exactly 10 years ago,
Way.
this was my last day at APIA
Oh
Scholars.
my gosh. Oh, that's how we met.
Yeah, before I transitioned over to Teach for America to launch the Asian American and Pacific Islander Initiative. I was the leading head of the API initiative at Teach for America. I joined as a healthy skeptic. and led that work for 6 years, working to build community partnerships with organizations that centered Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander students and communities to bridge the resources and opportunities and leadership pathways to recruit more AANHPI educators into the field of education and cultivate that leadership inside and outside of the classroom. And then in the last 4 years, I have been leading the National Community Alliances team as a vice president, where I was able to identify a successor to becoming the head of the API initiative, the Black Community Alliances, Latinx Community Alliances, our Native Alliances, our DACA initiative, which is now called our Immigration and Education Alliance, because we expanded the eligibility criteria to include TPS holders as well as recent asylees and refugees, and our National PRISM Alliances, which was formerly our LGBTQ initiative. I am coming from the ceded lands of the Lenape Nation, also known as Forest Hills, Queens, New York. And everywhere I go, I like to also bring with me the people who have inspired me to get into this work. And I know I'll be talking a little bit more about that, but that is very much my family. So I am calling into the space Ha Inho, Ha Myunghi, Ha Sekyung, Ha Sehyun, my son Jayu Mele, which means freedom in Korean, and my husband Tayo Ibato.
Thank you, Sarah. And last but definitely not least is Phan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this illustrious panel. Honestly, I only had known Ben on the panel, but Ben knows everyone, so take that as you will. But he's known me almost as long as I've been in DC, and we were just trying to count back the many decades. And I moved to DC in 2000. I know. But I'm Phan. I am coming off of a 10-year career as the outreach representative for US Senator Mark Warner. And now I'm the community engagement manager for Nova Parks. And before I came to DC, I'm from Portland, Oregon, but I was born in Guam, and refugee parents from Vietnam. And it's been quite the cross-country, trans-Pacific kind of journey, but it's really great because in Oregon, I was able to do a lot of political campaigns as well as the state legislature. And now it's kind of coming full circle after going from state government to federal government and now to quasi-regional park authority. But it's been really fantastic, and I can't complain at all. In between there, I was also a professional Asian American. I was the communications director for OCA, now OCA Advocates, and also a national governing board member for NAPOV. And I was part of the DC chapter of NAPOV when I first came here, which is another reason why I know Ben and all of our alliance kind of work. And also around the corner from here at the Center for American Progress, progressive think tank, I was on their immigration team and I was their anti-hate table manager. So yeah, lots of fun. And now I get to hike and be a professional extrovert and get paid for it. So yeah.
Are you an extrovert?
I am. Can you
Okay.
tell? I'm so excited to be here. Look at all of you. Yes.
Well, you have a really, I hope you were taking notes. I wasn't going to share, but I am, because hearing all of their backgrounds, I think you have a very interesting panel from which to ask questions. So I am adopted. My parents are white people from Iowa. Has anybody ever been to Iowa? Okay, well, I know you guys have. Very important state. So I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, and yes, we have electricity and we don't ride to school on. People ask me when we moved to the East Coast, like, did you ride to school on a tractor, or do you know what malls are? I'm like, okay, I am in my late 40s, but I'm not. So yes. And so I have also gone on a journey with my own identity. Certainly all of my family is white and have grown up in very white environments. married an African-American man and have a young daughter. She's not young anymore, sadly, she's almost 10, but who is biracial. And so stepped into the work. So my background is in student affairs. Anybody a resident assistant in college? Do you know who your resident assistant was in college? Okay. And I worked in college athletics for a long time. And I worked a lot with students who are from Forest Hills, New York, and places who are coming to predominantly white campuses in their athletic careers, but were not having the experience of that they should have been having. So that was really where my work began, and then really entered this other space here in DC, where I was working with communities actually in economic development of cities as it pertained to students who were graduating. So what is a city's health based on the population that has a college education, a 2 or a 4-year degree. And then that led me to work with APIA scholars, how I met Sarah quite a while ago, and then got into the work that I'm in now. APIA Scholars is our only national scholarship organization for Asian AANHPI students. And so we've been around, our birthday is next month, we'll be 20 years old then. So we're excited about that. But I wanted you to hear, we are a very diverse group, which is to your advantage this evening as we talk about pathways. So I want to get started and just ask each one of the panelists to talk about what inspired you to get involved in public service. And Mary, I'll defer to you since you are with us over many, many miles. We'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. As I said, I'm originally from Guam. My grandfather, the native Chamorro, he was one of Guam's first lawyers and Chief Justice of the Superior Court of Guam. And so he lived a life of public service and was very inspirational to many of us, taught us a lot about servant leadership, about humility, and living a life for the betterment of our community and our whole island.
Thank you. Does someone want to pick it up next?
Mine is a little bit similar. My very typical, stereotypical Asian American family emphasized education. Both of my parents were teachers, but my mom wasn't able to continue teaching when they arrived to the United States, but my dad did. He had actually gone to school in the United States before he actually immigrated here, and he got his librarian sciences degree from Syracuse, and was able to bring the whole family over after he got a job as the first English as a second language teacher in Portland, Oregon. And a couple of things, he taught ESL, but he also taught US government. And I like to think that it started this whole bug with me being interested in public policy and politics and public service through what he was teaching, because I helped him grade his papers when I was really, really small. Finding out about the 3 branches of government and all of that, it just left a very core memory for me. But he was also union because he was a public school teacher. And even though my family are all Republicans, he voted Democrat because he was union. And it kind of, rubbed off on me in probably a more significant way than they ever anticipated, because I was very, very outspoken about my political beliefs when I was very small, but it's only snowballed since then.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to start quoting Ben. So I was actually one of those folks that were writing down something you said that really inspired me. I think you referenced how letting the journey take you where it will, like strongly resonated with me, because when I was in college, I didn't initially think about going into public service. I didn't even know what public service was. I'm a child of Korean immigrant parents. I'm a satellite child. I was formerly an English language learner. I came from a low income background. I went to a predominantly white institution, Boston College. And I was the first in my family to go to college. My mom graduated. She didn't even graduate with a high school diploma. My dad did. They were among the first in their families to immigrate to Worcester, Massachusetts. And I went to a predominantly Black, Latinx, and a working white class school. There weren't many Korean American students like me at my school. My sister and I were the only two. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized what my family didn't have. All my life, I grew up sharing a bed with my sister that was a year younger than me, and my brother, who was 11 years younger, with him. I was a caregiver for both of them while my parents juggled 3 separate jobs together to make a life and fight for a future for us. I grew up with no heat. And when I got to Boston College and for the first time saw and was able to access a community of other peers that looked like me, had shared experiences, I felt isolated because I couldn't talk about the guilt that I experienced going to college and thinking, wow, this is for the first time I have a bed of my own, sharing a bed in my dorm. I have heat while my family didn't have access to heat. And while my peers were able to access opportunities for other extracurriculars or even engage in their social life, I would be voluntold into taking food safety tests so that my mother's restaurant, where she was a waitress at, could continue to run, because the tests at the time weren't translated, weren't being offered in Korean. So the restaurant owners would not have been able to access the exams to be able to run their business. My dad would have me come home to tutor kids who are recent immigrants from Korea. And then I think because of the poverty with which I lived in, the place where I felt the greatest connection was with a battered women's homeless shelter. So for the first 2 years at Boston College, I spent my time volunteering at Rosie's Place because I was really inspired by the model of servant leadership, thinking about what it meant to humanize every person's experience and what it meant to know their stories and know their name before they entered this shelter. And from that time on, when I was on my way to graduate from college, as a first in my family, I thought I wanted to go to law school because I was entangled in a litigation proceeding for 4 years after being the main witness to a negligent homicide and also being a survivor of sexual violence. And it was during that time I realized the importance of translating your personal problem into a public issue and being able to recognize how our daily lives are intimately and intricately shaped by the policies and politics in an intersecting system that was not designed for families like mine. And later, as I was about to apply to law school, my sister, who was just a year younger than me, also experienced dramatically different educational outcomes than me. She got left behind. She had to stay back 3 years. She almost dropped out of college 3 separate times. And when she was admitted into the hospital from an attempt to die by suicide, which was a result of not having had access to the educational ecosystems that allowed her to feel whole as a young person who had just come out, but had not come out to my parents. She had come out to me as somebody that also grappled with the triggers of poverty and limited access to the social and cultural capital to navigate the educational institutions she attended. That led me to rescind my applications to law school, and I decided to apply to institutions of higher ed to become a student affairs practitioner. So that is a window as to why I decided to, after going to UCLA for my grad degree in student affairs and higher education, I joined APIA Scholars because I deeply understood the impact that opportunities offered through organizations like APIA Scholars can have in dramatically changing the trajectory of a family.
That was amazing and so inspiring. Thank you for sharing. Ben.
Wow. I feel like I've talked a lot about myself already. I will say that you made a joke about us. Oh, of course you've been to Iowa. And I giggle at that also because I was not a political animal. I was very politically naive, actually. When I was in Berkeley, I was like, oh, I guess I should apply to something on the Hill because that's what people did. And I applied to work as an intern for the Republican House member, House district where my parents grew up, where I grew up, because she had signed the congressional authority for my brother to go to the Naval Academy. And so I was like, oh, well, you know, blah, blah, blah. She was a moderate Republican, but I just had very little sense of how my own convictions mapped out against the political landscape. So ironically enough, I moved to DC, and not because I had a sense of politics, but I wanted to be part of a national dialogue. I wanted to give back in, you know, a public service vein, I guess. But I was part of this emerging network of Filipino college students who were doing local organizing on their campuses. And we were kind of helped in our organizing by this new technology called email back in the 90s. And so we started the first national student email listserv at the time. And, you know, so we attended the first sort of national Filipino conferences. And so I came here thinking like, oh, you know, I'm going to be part of this national dialogue. And I kind of backed into the very political life that I lead now. I'm I'm an appointee in a Democratic administration and all of those things that entails. But yeah, no, it really became not because I had a sense of politics as a vehicle of change, but just wanting to pursue whatever vehicles of change that were available to me.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. I have a question, and I'm the kind of moderator that we did have a prep call and we did talk about the questions, but I also have some other questions now that you're sharing. So I'm going to wrap one into one that we were going to talk about, which is I want you to talk about challenges that you faced, but I want you to wrap that into the idea of creating change, because you're all talking about things that are, I mean, when I was in college and grad school, would have just blown my brain up in terms of like, what would I ever do coming to DC and think that I, from Iowa, could be part of any sort of change movement that would impact policy. And now I work with a team, not me, but my team has worked on, you know, making sure that we have different boxes to check on the FAFSA. Like that is huge, right? Because people are going to be able to identify with who they actually are on the FAFSA. Like, whoa, you know, and my mom's like, I don't even know what a FAFSA is, but it sounds very exciting. Congratulations, all of that. But I do think to unpack a little bit, challenges that you have faced in your roles and how you have impacted change, and humility is part of our DNA. Many of us in public service, whether we're Asian or not, I think it is a really important part. But I'm asking you to share how you and or your teams, the groups that you've worked with, have created real change to give the audience this. I guess I'm just trying to say, how do you unpack that? How do you get from the stories that you've all shared to now working in such important roles where you're actually impacting real change? And what obstacles did you face along the way? Since I threw that out there, just anybody can answer. If you need a little more time or you want to jump in. Ben. Just kidding.
No, I can go, and you probably need to prompt us and just tell us what to do. Well, no, and I say that because my biggest challenge has been kind of approaching this work through humility. You know, I think that, well, and that sounds weird, but it is I'm not a good advocate for myself, right? Like I can fight for the, the underdog or whatever, but, I was not the one who, I was out at work, for example, as an openly gay man, but like, did I need to bring that politic into the Asian American civil rights space that I was in? And so, we didn't call it intersectionality back then. Kim Crenshaw, I think, was still at UCLA Law School. But we called it different things, right? But when a colleague at the Asian Pacific American Legal Center in LA forced us as a coalition of civil rights groups representing Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders to think about marriage equality, this was like in the early 2000s, right? It was one thing to kind of live your life as your identity, but to bring that identity and advocate for it and to push for this policy issue that I was still very private about. I don't think I had come out, I guess I had already come out to my parents, but relying on that allyship to be able to let me say, yes, LGBT equality is an important part of our work as Asian American, civil rights advocates. And this is what it looks like because this is my life, So, but I think the fear of bringing yourself and your whole self to your work, that's something that I think in some ways I still kind of try to grapple with.
Obstacle. Thank you. And we can reframe this too, if it's uncomfortable to think about like, what have I done? But what have you been part of? What have you have been part of things that have created change. And you just gave an example, then I think of the tension between being yourself and moving something forward and having to make a choice. You made a choice at some point that you were going to do that. And that's very brave and courageous. Mary Ann?
As the kids say, that was a decision.
Mhm.
It was a choice. And for me, the series of choices that I was faced with just happened at different points in time in my life. So if you didn't know, Portland, Oregon is one of the whitest cities in the whole country. And it was my dad's job to teach all the refugee and immigrant kids that would come through Portland. So he was the teacher for so many different backgrounds of students. And I think for not just him, but for the whole family, that was an exposure to cultures and communities that we otherwise never would have interacted with, because just like any other immigrant community, you're kind of insulated. You stick with, like other people in your ethnic group. And that always bugged me so much, because even at a young age, I felt like my parents were like being taken advantage of, because they would only go to, Vietnamese grocery stores. They would only go to Vietnamese mechanics. They would, only like patronize those kinds of businesses. And it was what they were comfortable with. And I was like, but you're disregarding an entire, rainbow of people and cultures and communities because you're just limiting yourself to this one thing. So I always felt like the challenge of trying to expand my parents' perspective of going outside of the Vietnamese American community in a really, really, really white town was one thing. The other was I felt, having been a professional in parentheses, angry Asian American activist, was a really good breeding ground and incubation for me to go out into the wider, like mainstream realm of public policy. And I say that with utmost affection because of, like I said, that totally white upbringing. Being a professional advocate and working in different public service spheres was the strength that I found, to go and be an evangelist for diversity, equity, inclusion in so many other realms, even if I didn't have a name at the time. So I went from being a professional Asian American to being the only Asian American on staff for a senator who's got a huge population, not just all the Filipinos down in Norfolk and Virginia Beach, but up here in Northern Virginia. And to have like no other Asian faces on staff that look like me, that was a tragedy. And I was like, this is, unacceptable. So whenever we would have interns, whenever we would have other staff, I would always check out, hey, what's your background? And it's kind of a running joke. The healthcare policy advisor for Senator Warner right now is Colleen Nguyen. And I was like, oh, Nguyen. I was like, oh my God, she's Vietnamese. And I was so excited. And she turns out to be this lovely, lovely white woman who married a Vietnamese guy. And I'm like, oh gosh, but it was still cool. And she totally understood. She was like, I get it. But having that kind of strength from the community to take into like the whole mainstream area and advocating for that kind of diversity and inclusion is something that I face every day. So now I'm at a regional park authority, and let me tell you, maybe the whole environmental justice movement too is predominantly white, but it's changing. And I'm happy to not just witness that change, but also nurture it too. One of the things that I'm doing, a challenge that I've met is being more inclusive as a park authority. You don't always necessarily think, oh, people of color are using parks, are going hiking. But I mean, the populations of immigrant communities going fishing, using open public spaces during the pandemic as like places of worship or like just for family gatherings is exponential. And I'm happy to be tapping into that right now.
And thank you. We're going to touch on representation and the importance of that in a second. But Mary?
Thank you, Cheryl. Sure. One cultural norm that I think is common to many Pacific Islander cultures and perhaps to Asian cultures as well. And it's a challenge for us. It's part of our culture, but sometimes it holds us back, and that's humility, right? So out of a sense of humility, when I was working at the one of the largest community colleges here, where I was the director for information technology, for about 12 years at that community college, we were concerned because the leadership in terms of department chairs, deans, leadership on the college did not reflect our population. There are very few Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians moving into leadership, partly because the word leader wasn't something that we embrace. We're not comfortable using that word because of humility, which is a virtue in many of our cultures. And so we developed professional development courses, workshops to nurture leaders, and we use servant leadership. And we did not use the word leader when we were marketing this program. It was an institute. And we used culturally sustaining principles, and we used our own Pacific Islander cultures and our cultural values and norms and connected it to Western models like servant leadership, which is actually an American model. But we used that as a bridge to help people understand that they could have a role as a servant leader. So if we could reframe or change the language and reframe our professional development, our leadership development, it would be one way to bring more Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders into leadership. And it was our first institute. Out of our first institute, we now have 2 or 3 deans, department chairs, and people who are making significant changes to their institutions, and not just that college, but across this state. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, because what a journey. And then you actually have, you gave this amazing example with actual folks that have come through there who have been inspired to go into leadership. So thank you so much for sharing. And I keep looking at you. I'm not even sure that you can see me, but I'm looking at her. So Sarah.
Much of aspects of what Mary shared also feel reflective of some of the obstacles or challenges that I've experienced. And I think to add on to that, I would name like imposter syndrome, like really came up for me. I remember when I made the difficult decision to transition from APIA scholars to then join Teach for America as the head of the API initiative. One of the things that struck me was the transition from going from an organization where there was shared language, shared experience. Like I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to explain the critical issues impacting underserved AANHPI students and communities more broadly. And then to transition to an organization that was much more like mainstream. And then thinking, who am I to be at the leading helm of pioneering this new initiative at Teach for America? And I think the discomfort I also experienced was I'm an introvert. I think sometimes people challenge me. They're like, I don't think you're an introvert at all. I think I pass as an extrovert. I'm an introverted extrovert. And then I ended up having to
It's a false binary.
yeah, true. Thank you for that reminder. But I ended up having to assume a role that was very public, and the visibility to my role within my organization and externally created so much discomfort for me because I had to learn to take up space when I grew up in my household to navigate spaces with humility, to not rock the boat. But I was essentially asked to be in a role where I needed to speak truth to power and to make the invisible visible. And as I was sharing earlier, like I joined as a healthy skeptic, and I want to explain a little bit more about that. More than 10 years ago, I remember when Teach for America approached myself and another colleague on the programs team at APIA Scholars asking, hey, let's partner, right? And I remember before the prospective partner meeting with Teach for America, like I looked at the annual report. I didn't see the report disaggregating the data and validating the contributions of AANHPI teachers. And I was like, I know there are some scholars or alumni of APIA scholars who are in your core. We exist in your program, but that is a micro exclusion. When I see your website and your marketing material, you have a Teach for America Hawaii region, but I don't see us reflected in your marketing material or in your story. When you say one day all children would have access to an equitable and excellent education, who do you mean by all? And because I was asking those questions, it later turned into a job opportunity. They're like, actually, because of your constructive feedback, we would love to ask you to join us and lead this work. And lo and behold, within weeks, I learned that the incredible history of how my role was even created. Over 100 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander staff members at Teach for America had come together the year prior to put pressure on leadership, asserting the need for API outreach in education to support and help create a culture of belonging and inclusivity for our teachers and our alumni and our staff. And then also to help shape policy positions that impact AANHPI students and families more broadly. So I am proud that once I had joined, I was joined and supported by a very strong community of peers. And while it was really intimidating to help pioneer that, I leaned on a number of community leaders and advocates who had cultivated my leadership before I joined Teach for America. And in fact, like look to their mentorship and their support and their partnership with humility to help inform the changes so that Teach for America's policies, practices, and engagements were inclusive of our community. And since then, when I joined, I remember looking at data saying over 30 years ago, only 15 teachers in Teach for America's program identified as AANHPI. In the last year, more than 4,000 of our teachers nationwide identify as AANHPI. And when you look at the census data, as you all may be familiar, we're the fastest growing racial population in this country. However, when you look at school leader, the teacher workforce, school and systems leadership, and the broader public policy landscape, the leadership, the representation of our community isn't there. How many of you actually had an AANHPI teacher in your K through 12 education growing up? Oh, actually, I'm impressed. It's growing, actually, because I know like 10 years ago, I would only see one hand go up. How many of you have seen an AANHPI principal? 1, 2. And a superintendent in your district? 1, right? So less than 2.5% of our national teaching workforce identify as AANHPI, which is not congruent to the changing demographic of our student population. Less than 1% of school principals identify as AANHPI, while 78 to 82% are white principals. And 8% of CEOs of nonprofits identify as AANHPI, while 80% of them are led by white folks. And as a result of that, I was compelled to bring on and mobilize a coalition of AANHPI educators to bring forth initiatives that cultivated leadership into the classroom and even outside to go into public policy. So I just want to name one story that came up. I was deeply inspired by an education policy advocate at the Southeast Asian Resource Action Center, a good friend of mine who transitioned, but was like the co-chair of the AANHPI Education Committee. And back in 2017, I remember we were having a meeting and I was asking her to share with me like some of her challenges in her work. And she told me about a school visit she made in the Midwest. I won't name the state. I won't name the state, but she mentioned like she went to the school visit and there was a school principal doing a tour talking about their L program. And she asked, like, can you tell me a little bit more about your
English
L?
language learner?
Yeah, oh, English language learner. Yes, thank you. English language learner program. And she said, well, our L program is specifically catered to Spanish speaking students. And she then asked, can you break down the demographic of your English language learners? And he's like, I actually can't, I don't really know at the top of my head. She went prepared. She was like, let me pull that data up for you because I can access the community survey data. And when you disaggregate this data, 30% of these students are recent refugees from our community. So what happens to those 30% of the students? And to think that in 2016, 2017, that was a conversation we were having, it brought me back to even my own experience when I re-entered this country and became an English language learner. And remember a school principal sending me home with a parent handbook in Vietnamese. And I'm like, hello, I'm Korean, right? It's like, how can my parents even advocate for me? And I remember the English language learner program that I even went to was specifically catered to Spanish speaking students. But my 3rd grade teacher actively sought out a Korean American college student near my elementary school to supplement and become a tutor for me. Had it not been for that 3rd grade teacher, I'd be on a dramatically different path. But as an educator and an advocate myself now, I'm like, it is grossly unacceptable that this is still happening to this day. And that's why I believe that nothing about us without us is for us. And that in order for us to see the change that we want to see, we need to be at the helm of leading that change. We need to be at the helm of leading that change. Oh, nothing without us. Nothing about us without us is for us. And that I am quoting a South African disability activist who once said that. And like, so I'm proud that, over the last 10 years, during my time at Teach for America, we are the largest provider of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Island teachers. We have been supporting leadership development programming. And when I heard that story, I was like, let me go out to APEX, the Asian Pacific Institute for Congressional Studies, reach out to KPAC, Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and also partners and a sister organization called the Leadership for Educational Equity, and wanted to study the network at Teach for America and see out of the more than 4,000 AANHPI educators in our network, how many are in policy and advocacy? And I saw there were only 30. So in 2018, I was like, let me white paper and hustle and find the funding and bring all of these folks together and say, if I can initiate a program, but know that like with humility, I don't have the expertise here, but let me find the experts who can and build and ensure that our educators are accessing the pathways to get into that space. So we can dramatically transform our educational ecosystem to also include us.
Inspiring. All of us take a deep sigh. I'm looking at the time, which is in military time, I see. And we are a bit over. So what I want to do is ask the panelists. Sarah has done such a great job of talking about the importance of representation. I think we've all been in rooms where we are representing all Asians, or we're in a room where we realize, wow, there's no one that knows our perspective or how we might be feeling. Or we're being asked to represent other races as well. So I would love for any of the panelists invite you, if you have any kind of, it's not last words, but anything else that you want to say about the importance of representation to you. How have you made choices in your career, maybe that you were uncomfortable with, but you knew that it was really important to choose representation over your personal comfort? I think you had started by talking about imposter syndrome. So I want to invite the panelists to say that, and then we have time, I believe, for Q&A. So Anne, did you want to start with any last comments around representation?
Sure. One of the other roles that's not mentioned in my title is I'm also the DEI officer for Nova Parks. And I kind of alluded to the fact that it is extremely white, but the clientele and the people who use our parks are definitely not. And one of the things that I'm kind of happy to have started in the 6 months that I've been in the organization is I've had Nova Parks glom on to Blackbirder Week. There's nothing really kind of equivalent in the AANHPI community yet, but the Blackbirder Week was kind of initiated by that incident in 2020. I don't know if y'all remember Chris Cooper in Central Park in New York City. A black bird watcher got the cops called on him by a Karen who would not leash her dog around him, and he caught it all on video and it went viral, and now he has his own TV show. But it kind of like inspired a whole surge of formerly unorganized, loosely affiliated African-American bird watchers or birders to make themselves known and say, hey, we have space to take up in the parks too, and we're outdoors and we're here. And I thought that was just completely inspirational. But I did know going into my position that my job as DEI officer was to kind of head off those kinds of incidents at the pass and make sure that they never happen. So we teamed up with the organizers of Blackbird Week, which is the last week in May, which is, as you all know, the mayhem of APIA Heritage Month. And we were the only Virginia partner with the organizers to do a Blackbirder event. And it was terrific. I'm an amateur birder myself, but we saw over 24 species and we recorded them all on our eMerlin app. And it was an educational and very enlightening experience for everyone, but also a good exercise in claiming that space. You know, you're here for a reason, and taking up that space is not necessarily your responsibility or obligation, but it's also your privilege.
Thank you so much. I thought for the very first half of everything you were saying burger.
That's what I
And I
thought.
was like really trying to process that. And then I realized I knew when you told the story, I was like, oh, she's saying bird. Got it. Uh-oh. I think, did Mary freeze? I was gonna have Mary go next.
Sorry, just my video froze. Can you hear my
Yeah,
is
we can
audio
hear
okay?
your voice, yeah.
Sure, sorry about that. We have a storm approaching.
Oh, no worries. I mean, the joys of technology. It's amazing we're doing this panel with you in Hawaii anyway. So Mary, please.
Sure, you know, representation has always been a problem. I mean, I started as an IT director, the first Pacific Islander in the whole University of Hawaii system in directing IT, and the first female as well. And so, and one of the few Pacific Islanders and women leading the Pacific Islands Development Program here. So one piece of advice is for all of us as we move up and occupy spaces of influence, to bring other people with us and to make opportunities for other people whenever possible, through mentoring, through coaching people, through job interviews, through sitting on selection committees, hiring contractors. Just do whatever you can to make space for other people. And I think if we all do that, it'll do a lot, bring diversity to this country much more quickly.
Thank you, Mary. Ben?
So when I was at the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance, we were fighting in 2013 for comprehensive immigration reform, right? If folks remember that year, the Senate took a vote on it. It wasn't going to go anywhere in the House. It was our role in the larger queer movement to make sure that LGBT organizations were involved as well. Because at that point, this was still pre-marriage equality, the only way in which the mainstream LGBT movement saw itself in the immigration fight was for the ability for binational couples to petition each other in the same way that straight couples can, right? So literally organizations that worked on immigration would have meetings where the American citizen, you know, you're around the corner, you introduce yourselves around a table or whatever. The American citizen would say, hi, my name is, you know, Joe, and I'm glad to be here. And he would skip over his non-citizen partner to turn it over to the next person to introduce themselves. And so immigrants were invisibilized, queer immigrants were invisibilized in that movement. And so we did a campaign to bring out stories of immigrants who were queer, who were affected by the immigration system in ways that were not related to marriage equality. Right, so there was this queer woman whose sister, they were Southeast Asian, and because of laws regarding aggravated felonies that were automatic grounds for deportation, this woman who was queer had her sister under orders for removal for literally, she was left holding the bag at a rave, and she had like, you know, a bag of ecstasy with her. And so, so you can't tell that queer woman that being torn apart from her sister and her family, from her straight sister who would have been deported, you can't tell that queer woman that the immigration system doesn't affect her and doesn't affect the queer community, right? So for us to be able to tell those stories and to give the progressive wing of the queer movement the kind of political cover to say, yes, we are endorsing the entire agenda of comprehensive immigration equality, not just to be able to bring my, you know, exotic partner here from such and such a country at the risk of sounding problematic. But it was work that really spoke to my experience as a child of immigrants, right? So that was kind of something that where representation mattered and where us as queer immigrants and the queer children of immigrants needed to be there to move that work forward.
Thank you so much to each of you for sharing such personal stories, such reflective stories. Really appreciate that. We've talked a lot about community tonight. We've talked a lot about allowing some flow into your lives for opportunity, being flexible with things that might come your way. I think relationship building was at the core. I don't know that we framed it as relationship building. We talked a lot about servant leadership and about finding your own voice and your comfort level with your space. And then I think so nicely put by Mary, making sure that we are also bringing others behind us as well, pulling them up with us as we journey on. We are making sure that others are on the journey too. So I would love, and I'm very sorry, if without the time cards, I am the worst timekeeper ever. So I see we have like 8 minutes for questions, but I think we have some margin because there was some networking, but I feel like this is also good networking time too, is to hear the questions that you have for these amazing panelists who have had such an impact. And I'm not sure Hannah's going to tell me, no, Noel, that's not what's happening right now.
Totally good. First of all, let's give a huge round of applause for our amazing panelists here tonight, Noel, Mary, Ben, Anne, and Sarah. You guys were so amazing, just sharing all of your experiences and just inspirational messages with the audience. So I know that we currently have about 10 minutes left for questions. So what's going to happen is we're going to be handing out audience surveys to all of our attendees here tonight. Your responses and feedback are super important and help keep programs like ours running. For our virtual attendees, I will be dropping the link for the survey in the chat box very shortly. While we are handing out the surveys, if folks do have questions in the audience, feel free to raise your hand. There are microphones actually attached on the ceiling above you, so you just need to stand up, project your voice a little, and we should all be able to hear you. And for our virtual attendees, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat box.
Should be a t-shirt that says like, if you have a question, drop it in the chat box. That phrase has become so just a part of our regular speech. Drop it in the chat, maybe just hashtag drop it in the chat box. I feel like that could go wrong though.
I'm gonna go.
Are y'all just being shy tonight? Yay! I should have brought like a Snickers bar. I'd throw it out to you and be like, awesome. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Lori. I'm with Kapal this summer, but I'm interning with the U.S. Forest Service. It's been an awesome summer learning from everybody. I'm super curious about that. One of my questions was, yes, you guys talked about community a lot. This is actually an event from yesterday. I'm stealing this question from someone, but I think it's so relevant here. I'm just wondering who or what challenges you guys to do more and just to continue in this work.
I'll say something. I am motivated by this weird mix of inspiration and shame. And what I mean by that is doing local work. I pivoted from doing national stuff where I got to meet fabulous people like Sarah and Nöel and APIA scholars to doing local work, right? So working with our seniors in Chinatown and Chinatown in DC, if you haven't been there, unfortunately during the pandemic, I always say that Chinatowns across the country have been the canary in the coal mine, right? In terms of the pandemic, if you remember in February of 2020, a lot of the mayors were going into their Chinatowns and having lunch there because they were complaining about the economic downturn and like, oh, you know, Chinatown is open and we're glad to be here. And then a month later, boom, everything shuts down, right? So what's happened in DC's Chinatown is that because it's very central, because it's very accessible via a lot of different public transportation modes, it has been a place where folks who haven't had enough to do in terms of productive stuff. I mean, it's just been, there have been a lot of quality of life things happening there. Crime has been happening all over the city and all over, you know, in different cities, but Chinatown has experienced its own kind of public safety challenges. And so, you know, listening to the seniors there, you know, what are you doing? It's not enough, but also being inspired by the fact that they are at the Wall Luck House, part of the mayor's affordable housing regime because they were able to buy their building. And they are a cultural anchor for Chinatown, you know, is, again, it's that weird mix of like, oh God, I'm here for you. Like every time I see you, you know, that you've been able to, you know, be part of this neighborhood for 40 years and you're complaining because in 40 years, you've never seen it like this. Like, what does that mean for me? And what do I have to do to make the city pay attention?
So I would say, given the decades of experience that I've got right now, analyze yourself to figure out which best way you can serve in the public sphere. And there are so many different ways. One of the first leadership programs that I ever did, I took a personality test in 1991. Oh my God, I'm dating myself. But I have consistently tested as an ENFP every single time. If you couldn't tell, I'm extroverted. And I totally get my energy from other people, but it's nice to be alone sometimes too, but mostly around other people because I'm kind of hyperactive and, you know, like a little ping pong ball. But figure out your leadership style after you have assessed your own strengths and personality, and then find where you fit. There's so many different ways to be a public leader. The things that come to mind immediately, aside, you know, obviously running for elected office, but boards, commissions, getting appointed. There's organizations that would welcome your time, your talent, your treasure. There are so many different causes, and it's just a matter of finding which one speaks to your soul and going with that. And I've been lucky enough, you know, in that the work that I've done and do is all things that I feel, you know, benefit the greater good. So it, you know, it doesn't feel like work at all. It's really kind of quite nice, but don't forget your self-worth and get paid.
Mary's still with us?
Yes, still with you, but I didn't hear the last part of that question.
She was asking about how you challenge yourself.
Well, I think as a Pacific Islander, especially in American systems where we're such a minority, I use elements of my culture, wise sayings. There's a beautiful saying, "Irencha na latla I espirituta." Your heritage, our heritage, gives life to our spirit. And so I try to challenge myself to bring my Chamorro values into leadership and my Chamorro heritage. Whenever I feel a twinge of imposter syndrome, I remember that my heritage, my ancestors, generations of ancestors are with me, and I am leveraging all of their strength and all of their wisdom, and motivate myself to just embody all of that and do right by all of my ancestors, knowing that I will be an ancestor to future generations.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Sarah?
That is very beautiful. I don't know how to follow that. There's a number of things that are coming up, half-baked thoughts. One is like, don't underestimate the importance of building critical connections because all work is relational and you never know when it will come back around to support you, serve you, reach out for mentors, build a cabinet of council members to support you in your career, as well as in your personal life. And speaking back, like going back to the imposter syndrome, I've been in this journey of trying to challenge that, because I think imposter syndrome translates to assuming that there is a personal deficit, right? But in fact, when you, like, as I've been stepping back and reflecting on it, it makes me think about how do the intersecting supremacies of white supremacy, heteronormative patriarchy, and colonialism, and etc., how has that informed the conditions to make us feel as though we don't belong? So if there's anything that you walk away with, like I hope you walk away recognizing your brilliance, that you come from a lineage of resilience and power. There are many, many trailblazers and pioneers and ancestors that hold you, whether they are in this room or not. You can probably count on us, like being a shield and also dreaming of the possibility of what you are going to be trailblazing for our future, collective futures. And then the last piece is take the time to continue to build your self-awareness. I think the pandemic has created a lot of challenges with mental health. And I know that talking about mental health is a huge stigma in our community. I know I talked a little bit about why that's also significant in my journey. And I wanted to actually share a quote with you, if I may. Because I think all of us, I don't want to project, but feel free to challenge me. But I do believe that we all as humans carry our childhood wounds, as well as the scars, wounds, and suffering, whatever you want to call it, from our parents and our ancestors. So there's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that I carry with me. That goes, we know that the suffering inside us contains the suffering of our fathers, our mothers, and our ancestors. Our ancestors may not have had the chance to get in touch with the practice of mindfulness, which could help them transform their suffering. That is why they have transmitted their unresolved suffering to us. If we are able to understand that suffering and thereby transform it, we are healing our parents and our ancestors, as well as ourselves. Our suffering reflects the suffering of the world. Discrimination, exploitation, racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, xenophobia, poverty, and fear cause a lot of suffering in those around us. Our suffering also reflects the suffering of others. We may be motivated by the desire to do something to help relieve the suffering of the world, especially for those of us going into public service. How can we do that without understanding the nature of suffering? If we understand our own suffering, it will become much easier for us to understand the suffering of others and of the world. We may have had the intention to do something or be someone that can help the world suffer less, but unless we can listen to and acknowledge our own suffering, we will not really be able to help.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think one of the things that these four panelists have shown us is a word that just comes to mind is authenticity. And you're here in DC to, I don't know, learn the ropes of all the different things in DC and make decisions about where you want to go in your future. And you've had a summer here, which, by the way, why is it ending in July? Like, don't we have a whole nother month of summer? I'm pretty sure. But I think one of the biggest gifts that this panel just gave you this evening is that they have gotten where they are today. They've made the choices that they've made to get them to the places that they are, with the people that they're around, doing the work that they're doing, because they have made authentic choices in their life, which include being real about who they are and what's important to them and their value system, their histories. All of these things have played into it. And so I don't know, sometimes you get out there and you see all these people walking around in their suits and seem very important and very busy. But it really boils down to, I think, when we say networking, we mean building authentic relationships. That takes time and there's no shortcut to that, but you have to be very, very careful with all of the relationships that you build. Because as Sarah said, I thought Sarah was going to say, you don't want to burn bridges or anything, but she actually said something very positive, that these people are there to support you in the future, right? And you shouldn't burn bridges. That's actually a good piece of advice. But there's also this other side, which is that Sarah and I haven't seen each other in 5, 6, 7 years. But we spent a real authentic time together 10, 12 years ago. And so now I'd like to see you more and talk to you more, but we were just saying life is very busy. But we have built a relationship that we can fall back on. And that goes for your working relationships and in your professional life and in your personal life. And some of your professional relationships will become like great friends, right? I think I feel that up here. You guys are great friends. And so that's another gift that you get along the way, is meeting people who share the same passions and values and pathway that you're on as well. So I'm going to turn it back to, I'm not sure who, Hannah, but nope. I'm going to turn it back to you, and I've just forgotten your name. I thought it said Kathy, and I was like, I'm sure that's not right. Colby, thank you so much. And I would just want to thank this panel one more time. It's amazing. They've just let you into this amazing window into their lives. And so want to really thank them for the time and for your just gift of sharing yourselves with us tonight. Thank you. And thanks, Mary.
Let's thank our all-star panel.
You.
Thank you, Dr. Nöel, for bringing us to a wonderful wrap. I wanted to say thank you to Ann. And Ann, you're going to be happy to know a lot of tree lovers. We have 14 Copal interns this year who are at the Forest Service or somehow related to the environment. It's really great. Sarah, just really thoughtful reflections from you tonight. We are so appreciative of you taking the time to spend with us. Dr. Mary, I know you as a director of IT, you're definitely familiar with IT issues, so thank you for staying strong. I want you to know that your screenshot is very legal and everyone has really enjoyed you. So thank you for joining us from afar as well. Thank you to our virtual audience. Ben, I'm so glad that you're here to see what the Mayor's Grant is able to help support, and for being a wonderful closing speaker and panelist. Thank you, panel, really, for choosing to spend the time with Copal tonight with all of us. As Dr. Nöel mentioned, I think what was interesting to me is you all have relationships with each other in many ways, and it started in different professional associations and different groups. Those associations and friendships and relationships start in rooms like these. And so we encourage you to stick around and get to know each other and meet each other. This is our final WLP program for this summer. It comes back every summer, so stay in touch with us. There's going to be other Copal programming that's going to be happening this year. Follow us at Copal DC and on our social channels. I want to take the opportunity again to thank APIA, to thank Comcast, Verizon for hosting us tonight, Bonafide Masks, and particularly a special thank you to our phenomenal office interns, Sukmani, Rachel, Kevin, Millie. All of you have been helping us put our program these last 6 weeks. It's been quite the endeavor, and that's why we're not having more this summer. But again, other programming to come. Shama, it wouldn't happen without you. So thank you to our Copal staff. You helped bring this program back in person for the first time, and that's a huge endeavor. And Hannah, you relocated from Georgia to help us put on this program. You've been the backbone of WLP and all of our scholar internship programming. So a big hand for our volunteers and staff. So folks, that is all for tonight. We hope you stick around and spend time with us. Keep those masks on during the networking and mingling. Panelists, we're going to do a screenshot I think we're going to try to get Mary back on video here, so stick around with us. Folks, stay in touch with us, ask questions of the panelists, network, and have a wonderful evening.
Oh, can I just say one more thing? Opportunities like this have been the backbone of my entire career. Being a part of groups like this, and not just being a part, but like staying together. This is a very important cohort because most rooms don't look like this. And so you have to be each other's support system through life, like through life. And I have over time been part of cohorts like this to do it like a year-long thing. You know, it's like sounds kind of boring. Oh, your job is going to give you this chance to go be part of this institute or whatever. But I have met the most amazing people. We are like ride or die for each other. And these are just people from all over the country that you just meet in programs just like this. So I really encourage you. I'm not sure how much time you all spend together, but it's important, or it'd be great to like hang out with you and meet you tonight. But you guys have got to stay in touch. I hope you have lots of like social media exchanges and all of that. It's so important.
I've literally seen generations of interns that have built cohorts together. We were talking about how 30 years ago, the issue of Ward's Cove in Seattle as a workers' rights issue brought together interns from 1994, and they're still kind of in our orbit, right? So, you know, the turnaround, the
Amazing. If they have like amazing sweet corn, I just want to say that. Awesome.
All right. Thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody.